Good day and welcome to Crapper. Today I'm going to be looking at Move, the debut album by The Move. Just a note, it is Move by The Move, not The Move by The Move. It's the verb to move in imperative mood, move by The Move. Little tongue twister for you there to begin with. Now, one of my hypotheses today is going to be that this is one of the greatest albums of the 1960s. If not the greatest, why not? Let's test the hypothesis. We'll see where we get to with it. This album came out in March 1968. It was recorded in Advision and Olympic Studios in London. And it reached number 15 in the UK charts, if that's of interest to you. The cover was by The Fool, the Dutch art collective who worked with everybody really in London in the 1960s, Eric Clapton, the Beatles, etc. It had a long gestation because it came out in March 1968. But the first building block was the track Night of Fear, which came out back in December 1966. This track is important because first single by the band, but also it contained quotes from Tchaikovsky, the 1812 overture, and the bass line as well. They also included that for multicultural colour. So in that sense, it was the first attempt at sort of fusion, really, pop and classical fusion, which of course would be a running theme in their career and would continue in ELO, which was the band that came up. The band sort of arose out of the ashes of The Move. Come back to that later on. This song, Night of Fear, reached number 2 in the UK charts, but it was 4 months before their second single came out, I Can Hear the Grass Grow, because there were some complications in their career between the first single and the second single. It did quite well as well, number 5, I Can Hear the Grass Grow. They began recording for an album which they expected would come out in autumn 1967, but it didn't come out, for the entirely hilarious reason that somebody stole the tapes from someone's car in central London. It's a very sort of low-key London story, this. So instead, in autumn 1967, Flowers in the Rain came out. This was the point at which my colleague Sean in Crapper said that they could have put together a concept album about gardening. This one also did well. It's got to number 2 in the UK charts. It was the first ever track played on BBC Radio 1, which was the channel that had been set up to play popular music, which had previously only not been heard on the BBC, practically, but was only played from overseas radio stations or from boats floating around on the ocean. So this is an important track, and it's an important moment in the history of British popular culture. People mention this moment a lot, but without ever really explaining why. But actually it's because we're dealing with a sort of disclosure here of a new world, a new cultural world. And The Move were right there at the beginning of it. The next thing that happened to them, the next setback, was that they were sued by the Prime Minister, as one would expect in such circumstances, because the third single had a picture of the Prime Minister having an affair with his secretary on the cover. So he got offended, sued them, and took all the profits from the single, which I think he donated to charity. But, of course, this was another setback. And then their fourth single, Cherry Blossom Clinic, which was going to be which would end up being the closing track on the album, wasn't actually released in the end. Partly because the B-side was called Vote for Me, which was a satirical political track, and they didn't want to they didn't want to get sued again. So anyway, there was a lot going on at this time. The Move were obviously very, very busy. touring, doing TV and radio sessions. But anyway, by February 68, they had the album together, and as I say, they released it in March. Now, the lineup here was equivalently chaotic. They had Carl Wayne on vocals, Roy Wood on vocals, guitar, Trevor Burton on vocals and guitar, Ace Kefford on bass and vocals, Bevan on drums and vocals. They were all singing, by the way. Which was a weird thing because actually the main singer already seemed to be sidelined by the time this album came out, because they were all singing on this album, even singing some lead vocals. And in general, the lineup seems to have collapsed after this album. 2 people left, Burton and Kefford, and from then on there was sort of like, it was a sort of shifting lineup, although Jeff Lynne did join and to share songwriting duties with Roy Wood, and Jeff Lynne obviously became much more famous later on in ELO, as did Bev Bevan, who's the drummer and who continued in ELO. And as a lot of people know, the final Move album was recorded at the same time as the first ELO album, and with the same lineup basically. But the point is that this was a kind of shifting lineup, and the style of the band changed a lot after this. They became much more sort of almost like a heavy metal band in some ways, much heavier sound, much less poppy, and for my money, the quality drops as well. I think the main member that has to be mentioned here is Roy Wood, who I consider a genius and multi-instrumentalist. And he writes all the original songs on this first album. And my God, what a set of songs this is. In fact, I would even say that this is perhaps the best album of the 60s. I mean, what other candidates are there? You've got, in the UK scene, you've got Sgt. Pepper, Village Green Preservation Society by the Kinks, maybe Tommy by The Who, which stands out because it's a double, and it's quite an achievement. But this album, Move by The Move, is brilliant and original, and it's also perfect. And it's just so full of good ideas. I think it's like an experience of, the joy of pure creation, right? And all the songs are in a major key, or at least they start in a major key. So it's also got a very up vibe. That's also a joyous aspect. And this might even remind one of the title, because the title is Move, which has a sort of affirmationist ring. It's also a very succinct statement. The album's not particularly short, but all the songs are short. Everything here is under 3 minutes. So it's they're all very, they all say what they have to say in a very short period of time. Now let's go to the tracks. The album begins with Yellow Rainbow. It's a very hippie-ish lyric, this one. Reminds me slightly of Wooden Ships by Crosby, Stills and Nash. The band saying, let's leave for the yellow rainbow, but it turns out the yellow rainbow is actually a spaceship. So it's almost got like Close Encounters of the Third Kind vibe, avant la lettre, because that came out much later on. I don't know if Steven Spielberg was a fan of the Move. Anyway, I also wonder whether it's a satirical lyric. That's the other thing that occurred to me. Because it ends on a joke. It starts hippie-ish but ends on a joke. A couple of interesting musical features here. The beat turns around in the verse, which is a sort of, a sophisticated thing to do. It's also got one of those 60-ish compound chords in the middle. That's something that comes up again and again. I'll play it for you if you like. Highly evocative. Now, this is a good track, good enough, I think. Not my favourite track on the album, but there's an air of musical sophistication already creeping in here, and I like the sort of tone of the lyrics. Track 2, Kilroy Was Here. Kilroy Was Here is the original meme, as it were. It's also an example of cultural cross-pollination, because it was a thing that people used to write as a graffito on walls in the 1960s in Britain, and maybe in America as well, because the phrase apparently is a phrase that a sort of nonsense idiom that comes from the English learnt from the American GIs, because it was a nonsense idiom amongst American military personnel. And the British combined it with a traditional drawing of a man looking over a wall. Kilroy was here. That man that figure is generally called Mr. Chad. But yeah, so it's a combination of the British and the American, which I think is appropriate, because this whole album, in fact, this whole musical movement that took place in Britain in the 1960s is a synthesis of British, that's to say European influences, and American blues music, really. Now, by the way, I did read that both Hitler and Stalin had read the phrase "Kilroy was here" and they thought it was code. They both severally thought it was code for something, which is kind of hilarious, I think. Now, for me, the album starts here, track 2. This is a march with a pop song over the top, right? So you've got a classical influence here. Again, you could perhaps say this is the first Baroque and roll song by The Move, and which was a kind of style that was prevalent in the 60s, but it's really all about, again, mixing the European and the American, the old world and the new. So it's got a sort of formal quality, this track. It's a pop song laid over a march, a classical style march, but there's also a blues chord in the chorus. So this sort of echoes the meme itself musically. So in this sense, you could say this is program music, and it's got a programmatic element, and that is another thing that will come up again and again, because, as I often argue, if music has a programmatic element, it's more interesting at an unconscious level. But anyway, we can come back to that. Anyway, brilliant track. Kilroy Was Here. Number 3, Here We Go Round the Lemon Tree. This is a great lyric, this one, I think. It's a song about a guy who's fallen in love with his neighbour, and he wants to make this known to said neighbour. So it's sort of funny, it's sweet, it's got a sort of romantic element, but it's also funny and sweet. And it's also a nice example of bathos, meaning like where you've got punchlines, where you go from the sublime to the ridiculous, as it were. I've actually got a section of it here. Could I calm her down by throwing stones at her? That's a slightly dodgy line. If only I could make the right approach to her. Think I'd rather tame a tiger, turn those lemons into cider. Still, I'd like to get beside her. Which is a lovely little joke. This should all be taken sweetly, I think, because that's the sense in which it's meant. That particular example of bathos reminds me of one by the Kinks, which is quite famous, from Well Respected Man, where Ray Davies sings, and he plays the stocks and shares, and he goes to the regatta. He adores the girl next door because he's dying to get at her, right? That, in a sense, could be a summary of the Move track, Here We Go Round the Lemon Tree. Another example from later on in the track, morning came and into action went my plans. A serious line. Went to meet her dressed in bright green underpants. There you go. So that's another example of bathos. I think that this is a musically very interesting track. It's a bit more diverse this time because we've got a key change in the verse, which somehow mirrors the story. Shifts in the story are reflected by shifts in the key. There's a stop time in the chorus, which allows the band to emphasize the xylophone part. I don't know who's playing that. Probably Roy Wood, because he played everything else. And that xylophone is somehow, I think, is supposed to represent the sort of romantic moment in the story. So this is really programmatic. You can see this stuff. It also develops, a counterpoint is brought in on the later choruses, a beautiful counterpoint. which again seems to sort of indicate some kind of development in the drama. The whole band seems to be singing here once again, which is another example of their musical prowess, I think. But this is a beautiful track, and I would recommend it to all and sundry. Track 4 is Weekend, which is a cover. There's 3 covers on this album. All the rest are originals. And I think the covers are used as a sort of breather, which I suppose is okay. But I don't really know why they didn't just stick the singles on the album. The singles that had already come out, the first 2, aren't on this album. And they were very popular tracks, and they're brilliant tracks. They could have thrown any of them on the album, not to mention the B-sides, which are also generally quite excellent. This might, I think, represent a difference between UK and US policy, record company policy, regarding whether singles went on albums or not. I think you were supposed to do some promotional singles in the UK that weren't going to go on the album, so that could be a factor here, who knows. But this works okay as a breather, but I mean, it's not anything to write home about. Track 5, Walk Upon the Water. This is a very weird lyric. It seems to be an anti-drink driving song, but I mean, who knows why? It's about a group of people that go to the seaside. Some bodies wash up. Why? It's sort of, at this point, it almost feels like a sci-fi scenario, like a Doctor Who episode. But then suddenly they say, don't drink and drive. I don't know if it's a black joke or something. It's definitely some comedy. It's definitely played for comedy at certain points. Better get the life inspector, bring along his mind erector. So it seems like a serious topic, but actually it's played for laughs, as I say. Now, by this point, I don't know if a sort of musical pattern is emerging in the album, because you might start to notice one, because it's a rocky verse, let's say an American verse, and a Baroque-style chorus, like an English chorus. It's like an American verse and an English chorus. If we associate English with, European Baroque, which is possible, I think. Although there are differences, of course. The chorus is even sung, I think by Roy Wood here, in a posh English accent to emphasise the formality. So that's an interesting touch. So here we have sort of references to, let's say, the Great English Songbook, even perhaps Church of England hymnal, I think. It sounds sort of hymnal, this chorus. And I was thinking also possibly nursery rhymes, which are kind of a big cultural feature, characteristic cultural feature, let's say. Perhaps one could even say that the song itself is a nursery rhyme, hence the uncanny lyrics, because nursery rhymes are frequently uncanny in the Freudian sense of the term. Okay, great track anyway. Now track 6 is Flowers in the Rain, which I've already talked about a little bit. This is an iconic English pop track, evidently. The lyrics represent a sort of hippie romanticism. Somebody's contemplating. The singer is contemplating the wonder of nature here. It's almost like a pantheist track, and I wonder also whether it's like pre-romantic in its theme, in the sense like it has a sort of almost Spinozist affirmationism. Like even when it's raining, things are good. Everything has to be celebrated above all. Nature itself, which is considered godly, and this is very philosophically traditional. And the Move seem to be echoing it here. This is a fast 6/8 bluesy number. It's got a sort of swing feel. But again, they shoehorn in a kind of wind band type formalism. There's an oboe, which almost sounds like a moog, actually. Almost sounds like a synth. There's an oboe on the chorus. And so it's quite formalistic. And it's a formalism that almost merges with English music hall in a way that the Kinks used to do, and the Small Faces. Watching the garden grow, etc. So yeah, this is an enchanting mix of styles and sounds. Perfect opening to a culture. Not a horticulture, Sean Hall. Okay, track 7, final track on side 1. It's called Hey Grandma. This is another breather, another cover. This time it's a Moby Grape cover. Go figure. But yeah, so again, why not stick in a single? But, what do I know? Anyway, let's go to side 2. Side 2 begins with a track called Useless Information. This is another sort of hippie-ish lyric. It's about kind of the pointlessness of the mundane. And it almost reminds me of like situationism, which I think was contemporary with this album. That's to say, situationism as a political, artistic movement, which involved a sort of revolution against boredom, as if like the problem is not oppression, actually it's boredom, although the two things kind of go together. One does wonder whether there's a romanticism in this particular mode of radicalism, but that's a conversation for another day. The melody of this verse, the verse on this track, is wide-ranging, I would say nicely shaped. Sort of the intervals are big. This is a Roy Wood thing, which he shares with Paul McCartney, as Ian MacDonald points out in his excellent book, Revolution in the Head. It's his excellent, if depressing, book, Revolution in the Head. I think the development is less interesting on this track. It's got a relative minor bridge, and then the chorus is all played on mostly on one chord. However, it does have an alternative chorus at the end, so it's sort of medley-ish. And at this point, you can start to feel sort of prog rock coming just around the mountain. Is that the metaphor? They sing a line here at the end, "Isn't it amazing?" which is sung in a posh English accent. The whole band stops and they sing, "Isn't it amazing?" And I do wonder whether this is an early example of queering, if that's the word, because Paul McCartney was talking about how they did this, the Beatles did this self-consciously on "I'll Get You," where they were trying to sound queer in their words, which at the time was considered pejorative, not now. But perhaps faying it would be a better, rather than queering it, faying it. But anyway, yeah, it's an interesting moment, that. Track 2 on side 2, Zing Went the Strings of My Heart. This is another cover, another breather. Although perhaps makes more sense here because this is a showcase for Bev Bevan, who has apparently the lowest voice in the history of rock. So it's sort of parodic, so it's a bit more fun. And it also includes a comedically low guitar solo, which sounds like it's played on the bass. So there's more of a comedic factor here, so it kind of makes more sense, I think, this one. Track 3, side 2, is The Girl Outside. Now, I think the next 4 songs are the most amazing end to any 1960s album in the UK. That would be my argument. This track, The Girl Outside, is baroque pop proper, baroque and roll proper, as it were, because it's got a string quartet on, a la Eleanor Rigby. It's a rather standard sort of verse, not especially interesting verse, but the chorus opens with a diminished chord, which takes us back to the home key, but which is a sort of bridge taking us back to the home key, but now in the minor, right, which reflects the lyrics. So again, this is a clearly programmatic track, and I think that's so unexpected, that bridge, that little shift. It's so clever. It's simple, but devastatingly simple, like devastatingly clever. It's like a magic trick, as Sean would say. The lyrics refer to a fantasy girl, which the singer negatively compares to his own girlfriend for some reason. But crucially, I think the girl outside, on the outside, is fantasized. So this is almost, in a sense, a reference to Freud's theory of the other scene, right? The other psychological scene, which we can't see. So it's a little bit more sophisticated than it appears at first. Now, track 4, side 2, is Fire Brigade. Now, I think this track is a candidate for the best pop song, UK pop song of the 1960s. It's completely brilliant, this track, I think. Not least for its hilarious lyrics, Get the fire brigade because I find this girl so attractive that I'm on fire. And then in the chorus they go, run and get the fire brigade, and the backing vocalist going, ooh, ooh. So they're sort of like imitating the siren of the fire engine. It's just genius, really. It's hilarious genius. It's so joyous as well. In the verse, you've got these beautiful dramatic chords. It's got a brilliant, catchy middle eight. You've been fascinated by her. She could set the place on fire. Something like that. And by this point, verse and bridge, they've done so much that they don't really have to do much work on the chorus, I don't think. So, like in Useless Information at the beginning of side 2, it's mainly on one chord as if it's a coda, but it doesn't really matter. It's just, the total sequence works incredibly well. It's just such sort of energy, inventiveness, beauty. I mean, it's not surprising that they're sometimes referred to as the Brum Beatles, the Birmingham Beatles that moved, because this is Beatles level stuff, best of the Beatles, really. Not compilation album, but I'm just saying metaphorically. Okay, good. Number 5, Missed on a Monday Morning. This time the lyrics are sad. It's about a man whose wife left him and he's ended up homeless, which is quite a serious topic, isn't it? But again, we have a sort of hippie-ish, romantic, possibly, quasi pantheist theme, because he's happy, because he has the rain and the mist for company. So that's weird. This is another Baroque style number, Baroque and roll number, string quartet, and a recorder as well, which is the sort of universal instrument for children, isn't it, the recorder? So it's evocative of childhood and being at school. I suspect it's played by Roy Wood, same as everything else. Once again, the tension between sadness and happiness is reflected in a shift between a major and minor key, major verses, minor choruses. But it's very affecting, I think, and again, sort of fits with the lyrics. So that's programmatically sound, I think. And final track, Cherry Blossom Clinic. As I mentioned before, this was the cancelled single. This track is about being committed or sectioned, is it called? When somebody's sent obligatorily to a psychiatric hospital or something. Of course, what they do here is they play inevitably with the idea of, is this person mad, or is somebody else saying he's mad, which is a classic 1960s trope, really. It's not clear because at some points he says, I think I'll write a letter to the Queen, which is supposed to make you think that actually he might be what other people are saying he is. But it's undecidable, and that's where all the sort of the politics comes into it. The anti-psychiatry movement, which again was contemporaneous with this. There's a sort of curiously political dimension in all this without it actually being explicitly political. Now, this track is interesting musically because it changes time from simple to compound time between the verse and the bridge. So again, this introduces drama. It also changes key, by the way, between the two sections. So there's the drama in this, which again mirrors the lyric. So once again, we're dealing with a programmatic track. And these changes also, I think, make it seem like an epic track, even though it's actually only 2.5 minutes long, which is quite an achievement. Right at the end, it goes off into a completely other world, this is another thing that's characteristic of the era. The Small Faces do this on Lazy Sunday Afternoon. And you can sort of feel like the future of rock coming here, where the medley dimension of these songs is kind of extended. Imagine the ending being extended even further, and then you've got prog rock, basically. Perhaps we should also mention at a musical level here the proto-glam semitones at the end of the verse. Dum da dum da dum da dum dum. And so once again, between this and the mad ending, you're given the impression of things to come, great things to come. Above all, I would say this is a great chorus. This track has a great chorus, and it's a real rousing chorus, and it's therefore rousing into the album. A perfectly programmed album, I think. Maybe could live without a couple of those covers, but how offended can you be by a couple of short cover versions? In the midst of all this, as breathers in the midst of all this original invention. I think that sometimes the greatest albums are ones that feel like they're concept albums, even when they're not. And this is definitely one of them. Anyway, I think I'll leave it there. I hope this has given you a glimpse, at least, of what I see in this album. And I'll see you on the next edition of Crapper. Ta-ra!